Greetings, people of the interwebs. Jake here. So it's been a long time since I last uploaded any kind of review here on the channel. Mostly just because it's not really something that I intend on doing much of anymore, like I used to. Because for the longest time, this channel was all or mostly focused on movie, TV show reviews and stuff like that. But so, anyways, digressing. But I knew that once kind of going to Rings of Power, one way or the other, I would be reviewing this show. Either because I didn't like it or because I liked it. And so here we are. I finished with the first season, and I should probably also preface that I absolutely love all things Tolkien, like the books, the movies, everything. He's easily the greatest fantasy writer and really set the benchmark for standard fantasy. So tall, tall task, very daunting task to do anything in Middle Earth, especially after the incredible Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, but also I went into this movie with a blank slate, or show rather, because I knew I didn't want to I don't want to have my personal bias attachment to this world. Get me super excited, but also didn't want to just absolutely hate on the show. Because honestly, I wasn't really impressed with any of the articles that I read, kind of leading up to the show, or really any of the trailers. There were moments in some of the trailers that I liked, some of which I'll kind of touch on in the review of the show. But I wasn't super impressed. But I still intentionally I wanted to go into blank slate. Didn't want to get excited. Didn't want to just expect the worst. I wanted to go into this show and hope that it's amazing. So, after finishing the show, I gotta say it's not great. It's also not terrible. I would say, as far as television goes, it's decent television. As far as Tolkien goes, an adaptation of Tolkien's work, it's not very good, at all. There's a lot of lore changes that they did that, to me, don't make any sense, or I can't find a way to justify some of those decisions, which I'll kind of touch a little bit more on this review's also going to be a little over the place. It's kind of just the way I roll. But at least with some of the changes in the Lord of the Rings movies, because there were quite a bit of changes, but most of the changes, I feel or things that were left out from the books, Tom Bombadil is probably one of the biggest characters that a lot of people complain that he didn't make it to the cut of the movie. But I understand that, because even though I like Tom Bombadil, I would have liked to have seen in the movie. His character doesn't really drive the narrative forward. So there, stuff like that, I totally get why things were characters were left out, or certain scenes were maybe adjusted, or switched. Some lines of dialogue were given to this character when it was actually this character who said it in the books. Stuff like that make sense to me. And really, the only scene that jumps to my mind that really isn't justified in the Lord of the Rings trilogy is the elves showing up in Helm's Deep, other than it just looks cool. And that kind of really is the only reason that scene's in the movie. But, again, kind of digressing again. But I guess to the point, though, of a lot of the lore changes, the whole Mithril, being this, somehow coming from a Silmaril makes no sense, because the Silmarils were destroyed in the First Age. But also, even if somehow this was one of the Silmarils, which it isn't, at least in the lore, but this show plays fast and loose with the lore, so whatever. But playing devil's advocate here, even if it was Mithril somehow created indirectly by one of the Silmarils, I don't understand why the elves would want anything to do with it, because a lot of the worst things that happen to the elves in the First Age are either directly or indirectly caused by the Silmarils. So Gil-galad and all the other Noldor elves, they would want to avoid this like the plague, in my opinion. Or at least I feel like that would be the realistic thing. And even with the fading, because yes, that actually is, Tolkien writes, that the elves were fading. But but they kind of changed it because, like in the books, it's their physical bodies that would eventually fade. Um, but their souls, their Faya, as Tolkien describes it, would that would be fine. Like that would continue to last, but their bodies would eventually kind of fade, almost kind of like how the Nazgul are, where they're not quite living or dead. However, this whole fading thing probably wouldn't even start taking into effect until like late Fourth Age, because there are still elves in the Fourth Age, like after the defeat of Sauron and stuff like that, and their power was like greatly diminished. There were still a handful of elves, around in the Fourth Age. They weren't like all withered and feeble or anything like that. So I understand like the concern giving the elves in this show, like with the whole fading thing, but like they make it seem like I forget the exact timeline, but they're kind of like, oh yeah, we're gonna fade by like next spring, like we're done for it, dead, all of us are gonna die. I just feel like that was kind of unnecessary tension for this show that didn't really work for me. And also another kind of lore thing is, so in episode 1, when Galadriel returns from Ford Dwaith after discovering like the clues to Sauron in what I'm pretty sure is supposed to be a Tumnah, which was Morgoth's fortress, the first Dark Lord. But when she returns and she gets shipped off to Valinor. So one thing is, they make it seem like Gil-galad is kind of like the key holder to sending people to Valinor, which is not accurate at all. Any elf could sail to Valinor whenever they wanted to. And also, even though I like the imagery of seeing like the kind of clouds part to Valinor, it wasn't quite like that at this point. And then again, with timeline, what's timeline? What's continuity in this show? Again, they play fast and loose. It's simultaneously like the beginning of the Second Age and also the ending of it, or like towards the end of the Second Age. But like the approach to Valinor, like the clouds part and it's very heavenly, which is kind of how I see Valinor, but not at this point. Like it shouldn't have been it shouldn't look like that visually until like later in the Second Age when the Númenóreans sail to Valinor to kind of like wage war with the gods, the Valar, because they're jealous that the elves are immortal and they don't have immortality, even though they can live several hundred years of age. It's just the hubris of man, always wanting more. And then after they, sail to Valinor, that's when Eru Ilúvatar, the god, essentially, in Tolkien's mythology, essentially, like, removes Valinor from the physical world. And so their approach in episode 1 would be kind of like how I see Valinor and the elves sailing west after Valinor is removed from Middle-earth. Another big thing, too. So, even if Galadriel wanted to go to Valinor, she was banned. She couldn't. Because basically... that's a long story. But essentially, like, so to say, she was banned. So even if she wanted to go to Valinor, she could not. She would physically be prevented from going. So that was done. The only reason they did that was to get her to Númenor, and I found that to just be the most roundabout way to get her to Númenor. And so that was really dumb, her jumping off the ship in the middle of the ocean, I guess expecting to swim back to Middle-earth, which is dumb. I don't care if she's an immortal elf, even in Noldor. There's no way she's swimming back to Middle-earth. However, I will also, because I know a lot of people were complaining about the scene in episode 1 as well, where she fights that snow troll and just, easily kills it. I have no problem with that, because Galadriel is insanely powerful. So, yeah, I definitely believe she could have taken on that snow troll, no problem. That being said, like, the other elves she was with definitely could have put up a bigger fight. That's... whatever, that nitpick, they obviously had to establish that Galadriel is a capable warrior. So fair enough. Again, I don't take any issue with that, because, again, Galadriel is insanely powerful. Like, in the Third Age, during the War of the Ring, Sauron sends his armies from Dol Guldur to assault Lothlorien. 3 different times, Galadriel and her armies, in Lothlorien, like, defeat, they repel the attacks. And then Galadriel actually casts down the walls and pits of Dol Guldur single-handedly. And Tolkien even states that like the only way Lothlorien would have fell is had Sauron himself marched to, Lothlorien. So again, just to kind of give a bit of perspective on how powerful Galadriel is. So again, all those people who were complaining that like she's, everything is too easy for her, like I guess combat wise. There you go. However, here's the caveat. She even I don't hate the idea of her being like this powerful warrior because even though Tolkien never describes her as being like a warrior, she is described as being like very athletic and almost kind of Amazonian. So yeah, you could maybe make the argument that she could have participated in some of the battles throughout Middle Earth, in the first Second Age. But I do feel like it was kind of a missed opportunity. Like I feel like her and Elrond's roles should have been switched. Because Elrond, I feel like, he was the herald of Gil-galad. So I think that would have made more sense narratively. And also that the connection between Elrond and Numenor, like Elros, the first king of Numenor, was Elrond's brother. He decided to take the path of the humans because they were half-elves, whereas Elrond became an elf. So I feel like that was a missed opportunity there. Also with Gil-galad, hate the way he was portrayed in this show. He's like this scheming, manipulative douche, and that's not Gil-galad at all. Like there are songs in the Third Age dedicated to how like noble and fair and just how great of a person Gil-galad was. Whereas this version of Gil-galad is garbage, and Galadriel was not portrayed very well either. Like she's just very. Most of the legacy characters, I feel like, are super one-dimensional. Like, Galadriel's just she's angry. And to be fair, she has a good reason to be angry. Sauron did kind of indirectly kill her brother. Like, not him himself, but one of his servants killed her brother Finrod. And then also her husband Celeborn, which just casually gets dropped that he might be dead, which... That's a whole other thing. Celeborn and Galadriel are like the power couple of Middle Earth, especially in the Second Age. They also have a daughter, Celebrian, who I guess, I don't know, she may not be born at this point, or Galadriel just decided to abandon her this whole time. I don't know. This shows. I don't know what they're doing with this show. With like the lore, and I understand that like they do have to like compress the timeline a bit because there's like 3,000 years in the Second Age, give or take, and they're so yeah, I understand they have to compress the timeline a bit, but holy shit, like this timeline is all over the place. So yeah, I don't really like the way they portrayed a lot of the legacy characters. Elrond grew on me. Like I didn't love him at first, but after a while I did really like Elrond. And actually, I think the made-up characters for this show, the original characters, I think are actually the strongest. Like, I liked Disa. I loved her and Durin's banter. And really everything with Khazad-dûm, which absolutely loved getting to see Khazad-dûm in its prime. Like, the dwarves are my favorite race, not just in Tolkien's, world, but, like, just fantasy in general. Dwarves are my favorite race. But in particular, in Tolkien's world. So I loved getting to see Khazad-dûm in its prime. And that whole storyline was the most consistently... best part, and I think some of the best written parts of the show is the stuff with like the dwarves and Elrond and his friendship with Durin. It was also like again, I hated the whole subplot of like Mithril being able to like cure the elves. Stupid, makes no sense, dumb, hate it. But taking that out of the equation, that was still the most like in my opinion some of my favorite parts of the show is all the stuff with the dwarves and Elrond. But also Arondir, even though I didn't really feel the chemistry between him and Bronwyn, and they're like, they're supposed to be in love. Didn't get that at all. But I still think he was one of the stronger characters too, and also the choreography with his fight scenes I thought were really well done. Then also Adar, oddly enough, the antagonist of this show I feel like was one of the best written. Like he's very nuanced, and I like the idea that they're kind of playing with, because Tolkien never actually made up his mind on the origins of the orcs. The most common belief, though, is that the orcs were originally elves corrupted by Morgoth, and then, turned into what we now know as orcs. So I like the idea that Adar is essentially like this proto-orc, where he wasn't, he might have been like one of the first batch of elves that got corrupted, but didn't quite turn into an orc. It still has like some of the deformed like features. It has like black blood, and also like the fact that he shows compassion for the orcs. I thought was really cool. Like I think it was episode 3 when he stabs that one to kind of like take it out of its misery, and actually you can tell that he's saddened that he had to kill what he refers to as his children. And so I thought that was just so weird that like the new characters are like feel more Tolkienian than the legacy characters like Galadriel, Gil-galad, and again Elrond. I thought definitely got a lot better, but yeah, Gil-galad and Galadriel are super one-dimensional, bland, not very likable. Galadriel got a little bit better towards the end, but I don't know, just not a big fan. However, and actually, speaking of Arondir, probably one of my favorite scenes is, and very Tolkienian moment, is, again, I think it was episode 3, when he sheds a tear because he has to cut down that tree. And also, more credit to the actor, Ismael Cruz Cordova. Because apparently that was an improvised moment. Like, he made that up on the spot. So hats off to him for that great... Again, very Tolkienian scene that an elf is basically, shedding tears because it has to cut down a tree because it's very close to nature. So that was great. Again, there are these nuggets of great Tolkienian moments in this show where it gets me excited. So I'm like, okay, there are moments where I can tell people were passionate. They knew what they were doing with this show. It's just that, like, the writing is so bad. Or overall, again, like there's some good moments of dialogue. Like I love the scene with Galadriel and Isildur when they're talking on that ship as they're sailing to Middle Earth. That felt a lot more like a Galadriel, like something Galadriel would have said, instead of her just being angry and like literally antagonizing like everyone she comes across. Like when she first shows up in Numenor, picks a fight with Muriel. What are you doing? You should know better. You've been in royal courts before. You grew up in like the court of Melian the Maiar and King Thingol. What the hell? Stupid. But I guess kind of like I said, jumping all over the place. But like Numenor, I love getting to see Numenor because it's something like is always described in the books. And especially like in the Silmarillion, like in more in like the unfinished tales than in the Lord of the Rings books, but in the books it is referenced. So getting to see Numenor, like visuals, all the visuals are gorgeous in this show, and that's clearly where a lot of the budget went. Is basically making Middle Earth feel as realistic and making it look as good as possible. So in that regard, this show achieved that. And I don't care what anyone says. I don't think anyone can deny that, like, some of the set pieces, again, like Khazad-dûm, Numenor, Lindon, and I loved getting to see these parts of Middle Earth that we really didn't get to see in any of the movies. Again, Numenor, Khazad-dûm in its prime, we only got to see the Grey Havens of Lindon in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so getting to see more of Lindon was really cool, and getting to see Eregion, I like, and then other parts of Middle Earth, like the Southlands, which I do really like that story, or the idea of that storyline, kind of talking, or addressing the fact that, yeah, there were a lot of humans who were Morgoth worshippers. So that was a really cool story idea. Wasn't executed as well as it could have been, but that's basically this entire show. Had so much potential, had a lot going for it, so much potential. And it was like right... Like, if, like, here was the line of being, like, good, they were, like, right here. They're just right under that line of being good. And I feel like if this show was just, like, a generic fantasy show, didn't have anything Tolkien-related, I'd maybe look at it a bit more favorably. I'd still definitely be complaining about the writing, because, holy shit, the writing is so uneven in the show. Again, there are some good moments, and then there's some that feel so... just juvenile, and it felt like this was like a first draft for like the script of the show, and no one bothered to like revise it or like try to punch up the dialogue or anything like that. Really, this whole show is they're wanting to tell a story without really doing like putting in a lot of the work. There's a lot of like conveniences with like the plot, a lot of contrivances. and like a lot of stuff happens off screen, and I guess we're supposed to assume what happened, or it's just like quickly mentioned through like one line of dialogue, and that also kept taking me out of the show. Because at least like if the show was better written, I would still definitely like have my nitpicks and issues with like the lore and like their creative the creative freedoms and liberties that they've taken with lore, which I knew going in that they would definitely have to take some, because Tolkien didn't write nearly as much about the Second Age as he did the First Age, which is definitely my favorite age, and I would love to see the First Age come to life. And then, of course, the Third Age, that's Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. And also, they only had the rights to the appendices in The Return of the King. So they didn't have the rights to the Silmarillion or the Unfinished Tales, where Tolkien writes a lot more about the Second Age. Which blows my mind. Why did Amazon spend all this money for what amounts to only a handful of pages in the appendices of The Return of the King? And even in the appendices, it's essentially a highlight reel of the Second Age. The list of kings in Numenor, like the names of all the kings, when they started their reign, when they died, and who took over, the fall of Numenor, when Sauron forged the One Ring of Power, and like the three Elvish rings and all that stuff. So that's essentially all it is in the appendices, is just a highlight reel of the Second Age. And they plan on doing 5 seasons with just those pages. Now, one could argue that, like, yes, that does give them a lot of creative freedom to really fill in the gaps. And I'm not opposed to that. And I was not opposed to that. However, I don't think the writers are capable of doing a good job of that, from what I've seen of this first season. Because, the writing was not very good. I definitely feel like the showrunners were definitely way over their heads, because they had no they didn't have anything to their name, like of like projects that they had done. They'd written a lot of scripts, but for like 10 years they've been working in the industry, and not one of their movies had ever gotten picked up. So that's definitely a good case of it doesn't always work out to have like fresh new faces take on such a massive project like this. So I think like had Amazon put more experienced showrunners kind of helming this project, I think it would have turned out better. But overall, this show, I can't quite say it deserves the hate that it's been getting. But at the same time, it's also not very good. And again, especially the lore. I could go on a huge rant about the lore and the things that are dumb and don't make any sense. And I probably will do a longer video, like a podcast about kind of more of a breakdown of the show, where I kind of go into a bit more detail. Probably might even do like episode by episode, the things that worked, things that I liked, and then the plethora of things that I didn't like the Harfoots. The Harfoots they achieved nothing. There was no point to these characters in this show. They could have cut all the Harfoot stuff out, and given that time that they allotted to the Harfoot storyline, that again didn't go anywhere. The only purpose was to introduce Discount Gandalf, who shouldn't even be there. Gandalf didn't even show up into the Third Age, so. It's stupid. It's stupid. And granted, they never actually named him Gandalf or any of Gandalf's other names, like the Loren, which is actually his the name that he went by in Valinor before he went to Middle-earth. Gandalf is kind of like the common name that he took on. But he shouldn't be there. So that really, I don't know if that might be the thing that bothers me the most, is the fact that they, I guess, and maybe this was Amazon, like a studio note where they're like, we got to make sure people know they're in Middle-earth, so add Gandalf in there, even though, again, he didn't show up in the Middle-earth until the Third Age, along with the other wizards. Like, I would be okay if he was one of the Blue Wizards, because Radagast, Saruman, and Gandalf, neither one of them arrived to the Third Age. However, in Tolkien's work, he did kind of have 2 different stories with the Blue Wizards. I forget which one. which one came first. But I think originally he had the two blue wizards come with Gandalf, Radagast, and Saruman in the third age. I think later he decided that he arrived in the second age. But anyway, so I would have been fine if he was a blue wizard, and I still hope that he actually turns out to be a blue wizard. Because again, they never technically named him, like he never said his name. Although I do feel like that's kind of a cop-out, though, where the whole season, they're kind of like, ooh, who's the stranger? Is he Saruman? Is he Gandalf? Ooh, who is he? And then, so that was dumb. Really dumb. Stupid. I hate the Harfoots. Hated all the... They're a bunch of psychopaths. Like, they keep saying, like, they're all, you know, such a friendly unit. They stick together until you become an inconvenience for them, and then they leave you for dead. It's like, they were terrible. And, again... Had they just been, like, maybe one episode, that would have been fine, just to kind of show that there were proto-hobbits. I guess that's another technicality, too, is Harfoots are technically hobbits. Tolkien wrote that there were 3 different offshoots of hobbits. The Stores, Falhides, and then the Harfoots. The name hobbits didn't kind of become the collective term for them until they all kind of eventually migrated west across the Misty Mountains into what we now know as the Shire. So I feel like they could have called them something else other than Harfoots, but whatever. That's one of the lesser issues of the many issues that I have with this show. But again, I'm not opposed to like a proto-hobbit appearing in this show. I just don't think it was a smart idea to do like a whole storyline with them, because they just slowed down the show every time they were on screen. Anytime that there's progress being made, where like the story felt like it was finally, like the pacing was getting better, the Harfoots immediately like put on the brakes and slowed things down. So yeah, this show overall is not great. I'm gonna give season 2 a shot just because it's gonna take 2 years for it to come out. So I'm hoping that like that 2-year period, even though they have already started filming, but I'm hoping that's still enough time for them to course correct and improve the writing. Improve the writing first and foremost. It also, because I feel like at this point, all the changes they made to the lore, it's going to be hard for them to try to course correct that. It's just going to be a jumbled mess. But if they can at least improve the writing, I will be okay. I think I can at least watch this show and enjoy it for what it is. Again, I'll still probably nitpick and complain about the lore being changed. But for God's sake, improve the writing. That is the key to this show. The writing needs to be good, especially for Tolkien. Tolkien needs to be held in a higher standard than like any other kind of series. Like if this was just, again, another generic, like random generic fantasy series, then whatever. Again, I'd probably still complain about the writing, but I would be a bit more positive. Of course, I also don't know if I would have continued watching the show if it was not Tolkien. But all that to say that like Tolkien needs to be held in a higher standard because he essentially created the modern fantasy genre. We would not have all of our favorite fantasy books, shows, movies, even D&D would probably not exist, or at least exist in the form that it does without Lord of the Rings. That's what kind of inspired the whole party dynamic in a D&D campaign. So yeah. I don't know, I'd maybe give it like a 5 out of 10, and a lot of that is because the music was solid, visuals, all great, the cast was all pretty good. I don't think most of them didn't really have the best material to work with, but I think they still did good enough. The acting was at least good enough to where I don't think anyone was particularly a bad actor or anything like that. So, all smart casting decisions. Smart with Bear McCreary doing the score for the show. The visuals, great. So those 3 things, all consistently good throughout the entire show. I just really wish the writing was better. But anyways, I think I've kind of rambled a bit too much since it's like half an hour long. But that pretty much wraps up this kind of somewhat incoherent rant / review of Rings of Power. Yeah, didn't really love it. Definitely could be better. It could have also been worse, but it could definitely be better. A lot of room to improve. and probably want to do like a more in-depth review and kind of like breakdown of this show. I'll probably bring on like a guest or maybe two guests just to kind of and ideally have someone who is a bit more positive, because maybe like talking to some like kind of really hashing out with like someone who's a bit more positive on the show could maybe change my perspective a bit. And I may also rewatch the 8 episodes as well, just on the off chance that maybe a rewatch I might appreciate some things a little bit more, and now that I know what to expect with the drastic changes with the lore, I might be able to enjoy it a little bit more. So be expecting that. And if you haven't already watched the first episode of the new kind of iteration of the Pacey Pell podcast, check that out. Me and my friend John just kind of sat down and I hit record, and we had a nice like hour and a half long conversation about the meaning of life, professional rock skipping, comics, beer. So yeah, check that out. I also have started a Facebook page called Vlogging with Jake. So if you want to check out my travel adventures, you can follow. Like that page, however that works. I'll link in the description below. Except I have a trip in February to New Zealand, so I'll definitely be posting a lot of videos on that Facebook page, and probably post some. I don't know. I might put some videos on the YouTube channel too, but definitely mostly going to use that page for like vlogs and keeping up with what's going on with me. But so yeah, if that interests you, check that Facebook page out. Give it a like and follow, and Twitter, Irishman Jake. I'm not really on there very much, but if you follow me and tweet at me, I'll be a lot more active on there. So you can follow me there too. But that wraps up this review. Hopefully you all have enjoyed, and I'll probably start being more active for once on this channel now. So until next time, everyone, cheers.